Good afternoon and welcome to this session. This is a webinar session on Respondus LockDown browser and how faculty can utilize it. My name is Ryan Falkus. I'm a technical specialist for the Center for Instructional Technology, better known as C4IT for Ivy Tech Community College. With me today is Ari Sowers from Respondus. She is Director of Training at Respondus. Ari has been with Respondus for 10 years. And at the same time that I've been at Ivy Tech. So we have crossed paths, and she's been working with us directly or indirectly off and on for 10 years. We've try to do different trainings through, not every year, not every semester, but just so that we have some sort of in the can, if you will, that we can post and just have kind of the latest and greatest. Obviously, we've gone through a big LMS change over the last year with changing over from Blackboard to Canvas. And then just with the turnover of faculty and the new folks coming on board all the time, it feels like we just want to make sure that we have great training available to all of you. So I realize there is right around 10 folks that are in here in this training live, but we want to be able to, record it and post it in our faculty resource center. So I definitely encourage everybody to get access to the FRC. If you're a faculty or staff member, all you have to do is put in that request. Just by going through Ivy Learn, looking at help, and then looking at the Faculty Resource Center link there. And if you haven't done it before, you'll put in a request to get access to it, and then it's basically me just making sure you're a faculty or staff member at the college, and then I give you access to it. So once you get in there, if you haven't already, just go into the content folders, and you'll see different vendors, different tools that we like to just put information on. So you'll see a folder by itself for Respondus, and it'll have all the information in there about Respondus 4.0 and Respondus LockDown browser. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Ari. So here is Ari Sowers.
Great, thanks Ryan. So thanks everyone for taking the time to join us today. Again, my name is Ari Sowers. I'm the training team at Respondus. I feel like I talk about LockDown browser almost all day, every day. It's my favorite subject. So you are in for about 45 minutes, I think. We probably could do this in a little bit less and make sure there is tons of time for questions, and so get everybody onto their next thing early. To talk about how to prevent cheating during your tests and quizzes in Canvas with LockDown browser. What LockDown browser is, for anyone who has never seen or used it before or heard of it, it's a custom browser from Respondus. It has been out in the world since 2006. Its job is, obviously we've updated it since then, but its job is to add security to online tests. So if you're giving exams in Canvas, generally LockDown browser is used in proctored environments, although we can talk about what happens in unproctored environments. Its job is to make sure students are not cheating. They're not using resources they shouldn't be using. They're not looking up answers online and sharing test questions and those types of things. And it is a tool that integrates with Canvas via an LTI type of integration. You'll see exactly what that looks like inside a Canvas course. And if you are so inclined, you can even follow along and find it yourself in your own courses. More specifically, before I jump in and show you LockDown browser, what it does when a student is taking a test or quiz in the browser, they are in Canvas, but they are using LockDown browser instead of Firefox or Chrome or Safari to take the test. This means they can't print, copy the content of the test, capture the screen in any way. They're not be able to share those exams or put quiz questions in files for other students to use. They can't visit any other websites. They can't open other browsers or other windows or tabs in LockDown browser unless you want them to, and we'll talk about that. But generally, they're not going to be able to go Google answers to test questions. And they can't access any other applications. So no instant messaging programs, communication tools, other types of browsers, Word files where they have notes or cheat sheets. That really the only thing they can do is take the test or quiz in Canvas. So this looks like a long list, but it really isn't. I'm going to show you the instructor's perspective of setting up your quizzes so they require LockDown browser. I'm also going to show you some of the optional or advanced settings that we have available when there are other things you want students to be able to do. Over the years, we have constantly getting requests from instructors to say, well, I want to lock students into the quiz, but I still want them to use a spreadsheet or a calculator or a publisher's ebook. And I'll show you how you can do all those things. And then I'll take the test as a student on a Windows computer. That's what I'm using today, but I can also show you what it looks like on other platforms and devices. I'll show you the process of what a student would go through when they first get set up to use LockDown Browser. I'll also show you exactly what it looks like to take a test in LockDown Browser. But to start off with that instructor's perspective, what I'm going to do is quickly pop over into a Canvas course where I am an instructor. If you were on the training earlier, this is our geography course again. I have some quizzes that I've already set up here, as you can see. If I go to the quizzes area, there's a couple of them in here. So really, your first step to using LockDown Browser, if you've never used it before, is to create your tests and quizzes and make sure they're in Canvas. However you want to create them is fine. If you were on the earlier training, you do not have to use Respondus 4.0 to do that, although you could. You can just write your quiz in Canvas if you want to. But write your quiz, the test questions, the settings, the point values, all that stuff is still managed and housed right here in Canvas. Student is not taking the test in LockDown Browser. They're using LockDown Browser to get to the test. It's the difference between, you're driving the car or being on the road. The LockDown Browser is like the road, and the car is still Canvas with all the features that your Canvas tests have. But once you've created those tests, we'll open the LockDown Browser dashboard link, which is, might be in a different place in your course menu, but it's going to be in this left-hand menu somewhere. When you open the LockDown Browser dashboard link, this is a relatively new feature. It's a couple months old. You're going to see what we call the welcome screen. Now, I won't go through these in detail because I'll save this stuff for the end, the getting started and best practices part. But what we have in here are basically some video tutorials. They're specific to Canvas because that's what you're in. There's some resources for getting started, including some very useful language text that you can use in your course. And then links off to other resources that are on the Respondus website. If you don't need any of this, you can just click continue, but you can always get back to that screen by clicking About LockDown Browser right here in the upper right. And you can also hide the screen if you don't ever want to see it again, but even if you do that, you can still get to it from the About LockDown Browser link in the upper right. On the dashboard, you're going to see a list of all those tests and quizzes. This is the same list that we saw when we were in the quizzes tool in Canvas. These are your Canvas quizzes. What you'll also see here is a column for LockDown Browser and a column for an application called Respondus Monitor that we're not covering today, but I can answer questions about it if you like. It's a separate application licensed separately, typically used in unproctored environments. We're going to focus on the LockDown Browser column. In the week 1 quiz, we'll use that as our example today. To apply the LockDown Browser setting, I'm going to select this menu and select Modify Settings. And then it really is this easy. Just click Require LockDown Browser for this exam. And then, oops, I'm missing my Save button. There it is. And then click Save and Close. And that's really all I need to do to use LockDown Browser. Now, I told you I would show you some advanced and optional settings. Let me turn some of these off, and I will. Underneath the LockDown Browser requirement, the first thing that you see, and I know this text might be small, but it says, require LockDown Browser to view feedback and results. This is pre-checked. You can always turn it off if you don't need it or don't want it. What this does is it ensures that students additionally have to use LockDown Browser if they're going to look at correct answers, feedback that you provide, their grade. They can't get to that information without LockDown Browser if that box is checked. And this is useful because if you do provide feedback and results to students, and let's say you leave it open for a couple days after the test is over, you don't want students accessing that information from home, printing a copy of it, and then giving it to someone who hasn't taken the test yet, right? That's cheating. So we can protect that content as well as the content of the test itself with this feature. If you don't use feedback and results, you don't care. You can leave this alone. It doesn't matter if you uncheck it or check it. The next thing we see is a way to protect access to the test. In Canvas, you can set an access code or password, if it's easier to think of it as a password, for the exam. That means that the student can't get into it unless someone enters the code. And you make that code up. It could be anything you want right here. ABC. Now, typically, the way this feature is used, and you can see right there, it's optional. You don't have to use it, and I won't today. But typically, the way this feature is used is if you are sending students to a testing center, a proctored lab, maybe you are spreading them out over a couple different rooms as they can take a test, and you need someone to check them in and let them into the test, namely a proctor, but that could be you, could be your teaching assistants, that kind of thing. This makes sure that students cannot get into the test unless someone else lets them in. So you don't give students this password, you give it to the proctor or proctors. And then that proctor can do things like check ID, make sure phones are off, whatever the other rules are for your exams. But again, optional. I'm going to leave that alone for now. I opened the advanced settings, which appear under this plus sign here, because it's worth talking about a few of these, and I already mentioned what I was going to cover a little bit earlier, so I have to deliver on that promise. What you see here are some things that mostly what these do are they changed in a little ways how the browser behaves. So if you, for example, want students to access a calculator, a digital calculator, not a device they bring into a test environment that could have cheat sheets hidden in it, you can enable a calculator on the toolbar of LockDown browser, and there's two versions, standard and scientific. You also can give students access to print the test if you want to, although I will say this feature is so rarely used because you usually don't want students keeping copies of their exams. There's a feature that allows students to access specific external websites. So this is worth backing up a tiny bit and explaining in a bit of detail. For example, if you want students to access a web page, just a single page, like respondus.com/lockdown browser. That's just one page. You don't have to use this feature. You can just embed the link to that page in your quiz question. What it will do is it will open LockDown browser in a separate tab, open the page, I mean, in a separate LockDown browser tab and let the student look at that page. But they won't be able to click links anywhere else, even if it's still in respondus.com. That keeps them just looking at that one page. We call this the viewing a web page feature. It's built into LockDown browser, nothing special. However, let's say I want my students to go to all of Respondus. Let's say I want them to search for something, or I want them to look at a couple different sites, make some comparisons, write an essay response. To give them access to an entire website, you want to use this advanced setting. It sounds a little technical. Allow access to specific external web domains. A domain is the thing before the dot something, 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 like respondus.com or ivtech.edu. That's your domain. If you want students to access, for example, all of National Geographic, I think it's Nat Geo, you can put in the domain for that website, drop the www part, just put the middle and the dot something. Then if you include a link to a page on that website in your test question, students can access the entire website. They're not just restricted to the individual page. It does mean, though, if you do give students access to this website and there's a link to, as many websites have, Twitter or Google or YouTube, they won't be able to go to Twitter or Google or YouTube. They have to stay within the domain you listed right here. And you can put more than one. I mean, a lot of instructors want students to use their ebooks. So maybe, you put the domain for the publisher that you use, and then they can access, log into, and get their book if it's an open book test. Sometimes there are tools on websites you want students to use. StatCrunch is very popular. As long as it's web-based, students should be able to use it if you put the domain here and put the link to that website in the quiz question. So there's two steps. Domain goes here, link in the quiz question itself. You also can let students use an iPad. Now, I mentioned earlier I'm going to show you how LockDown browser works on a Windows or Mac computer, but we also support iPads. It works a tiny bit differently because iPads have their own apps. When a student is using an iPad to take a test with LockDown browser, they have to install the iPad app from iTunes or the App Store. This explain link, along with these others, all have really useful information about how these features work. This one, though, in particular, has instructions that can be given to students if you want to. So there's an article right here about how to use the iPad app. Now, most students figure it out without much help because they just go to the App Store, they search on LockDown browser, they set it up once, and then that's what they use to take their test instead of the Safari browser or the Canvas app. They have to use LockDown browser. We set this up so you can choose if you want your students using iPads or not. LockDown browser by default will work on Windows and Mac computers, but you can allow this additional device type if you'd like. Now, the last advanced setting I want to explain, and it's worth explaining last, is the one at the top. This one reads, lock students into the browser until the exam is complete. Now, what this does, and you might think, well, that sounds logical. Why doesn't it do that by default? What this does is it makes sure that students cannot exit LockDown browser until they've submitted the Canvas test to be graded. However, over the years, we have found that LockDown browser both is used in unproctored environments where students don't have anybody there to help them, and also sometimes things happen, emergencies, the power goes out. And if those things happen and the student isn't able to submit the test and they're halfway through an hour-long exam, we don't want to force them to do a hard reboot because they're stuck in LockDown browser. That's what this setting would do if you choose to use it. It's off by default so that students have a way to safely exit LockDown browser if they need to. But it's not simple. They can't just exit and then restart the test if they want to. They have to do a couple of things before they exit. One is confirm that they're actually leaving the test and they haven't submitted it yet. And two is they have to provide an explanation to you, the instructor, why they're leaving early. And oops, what just happened there? And that explanation, as a matter of fact, will show up here. I don't know if you can see that text says review early exits. That is where you can review that information if you do see an unfinished exam. Oops. So I'm actually going to click lock students into the browser until the exam is complete because I'm going to show you what this looks like. We mentioned in this little explain link here, and I also said it earlier, we only recommend that this feature be used in proctored environments where somebody who has the authority to verify what the student is doing or to help them with a technical issue is sitting in the room or the location with them. One thing you might do if you use this setting is provide an escape password. So if the student does need to exit the browser early, someone can come and let them out. But generally speaking, this is useful if you have one proctor and 200 students who can't possibly be watching what every single one of them is doing, and you don't want a student figuring out that they can get out, provide an explanation, and then get back in while the proctor's back is turned. You can lock students into the browser until the exam is complete to prevent that from happening. So I'll turn that on. If anybody wants to see it off, I can also do that when we get to the Q&A. All right, so once I have gone through all the settings I need, oops, I'm not going to turn on this Respondus Monitor feature. You won't see these, by the way, if Respondus Monitor is not enabled at Ivy Tech. That's that second application we talked about. I'm going to save and close my LockDown browser settings, though, and what I'm going to see when I do that, what just happened to my LockDown browser dashboard, is I'm going to see a list of those testing quizzes, and my week 1 quiz right here says requires LockDown browser in the name of the quiz. That means my students are going to see that this quiz requires the locked browser. Also, you're going to see LockDown browser in required in this column here. So now I know this has been set up correctly. One really common thing that happens, and in case this ever happens to you or has happened and you're not sure why, is sometimes instructors will do this and then they'll forget to edit something in the quiz. Oh, let me go back into the quiz itself. Let me change a few things. Oh, and by the way, I don't like the name of the quiz. And I'm going to edit the name of the quiz. I'm going to take the words requires LockDown browser out of the name of the quiz. I don't like that. You can't do that. And the reason you can't edit the name of the quiz is that we, LockDown browser, need to know from Canvas which quizzes require LockDown browser. That is one of the ways it does it. So changing the name of the quiz after you've applied the LockDown browser setting is actually going to break the integration between Canvas and LockDown browser. The good news is it's very easy to fix. In fact, this is going to look pretty obvious. When we get here, you'll see an error message and it will say, surprise, fix it. You just click fix it and it restores the setting as well as the text appendage here to your name of the quiz. So if you ever see that error, just click fix it and you're all good. If you do need to make edits to your test, especially to the test name, remove the lockdown browser requirement and then reapply it. Make the lockdown browser requirement the last thing you do before you give the test to students, which is what I'll do now. We talked a little bit about the student's perspective. I'll talk a little more right now before I go ahead and take that quiz. So when a student is going to take a test that requires lockdown browser, they can use, as I said before, Windows and Mac or iPads if you set it up. And I've got some screenshots of what it looks like on an iPad. If anybody wants to see that, just submit it as a question. There is one setup step that needs to happen no matter what version of lockdown browser they're using, and that is the browser or the app needs to be installed just once. Once it's installed, they can use it as much as they want to. This is not the same thing as a plugin or a download that you have to do every time you use it. Once it's installed, it's there forever or until you remove it. Just like Firefox and Safari and Chrome are installed on your computers. So if you are sending students into a testing center, lab, computer lab, classroom with computers in it, the browser can be pre-installed by the IT folks, maybe that's Ryan's team, who has the browser installed for you. There's a version of Lockdown Browser called the Lab Edition, which is specifically designed for managed environments. So let's say the school manages all of those computers and it doesn't allow students to download things. That means the student can't install Lockdown Browser themselves, and you can use the Lab Edition. That's what it's for. So you don't have to worry about how that gets set up. As instructors, you're generally not doing those installations. If students are using personal computers, let's say they're bringing their laptops into the classroom and taking tests in front of you, they can install the browser themselves. And as Ryan mentioned earlier, there's a resource area, I think it's called the Faculty Resource Center, where this information lives. When students are installing the browser themselves, one thing that you need to keep in mind is they have to use the link that is unique to Ivy Tech. They can't just Google Lockdown Browser and find any old link out there on the web, and they definitely cannot get it from Respondus. It's not on our website, and we don't give it out. It has to be given out by someone at the institution. That's a good thing, because we're verifying this is the right student, this is the right link. So students need to be given that link. And there's a couple ways that can happen. You know, maybe it's already posted in Canvas for them. That's great, they can use it that way. Instructors, though, you might additionally want to include the link to install Lockdown Browser if you're letting students use their own computers in your course somewhere so they can get to it if they missed the memo on how to get it elsewhere. Make sure that they have a couple places they can access it. Again, once they click that link and go to install it, it's a one-time installation. It's the same thing as installing any other application out there, and once it's there, it's done, and they can use it as much as they need to. So now I am going to take the test as a student. I already have Lockdown Browser installed to my computer, as you probably expect me to since I work for Respondus. Here it is. This is what the shortcut to Lockdown Browser looks like on a Windows desktop. On a Mac, it would be in the Applications folder. It's still this cute little padlock on an iPad too, so it's easily recognizable. So when a student is ready to take that test, the first thing they're going to do is not open Chrome or Safari or Firefox. They're opening this browser, Lockdown Browser. Then it will load up. Now, a couple of things are going to happen the first time a student uses Lockdown Browser, maybe even the second and third and fifth times. First of all, it's going to open full screen. Actually, that happens every time. The student will no longer be able to see anything else on their desktop, on their device, like the start button, the system tray, the dock. All those things will be hidden because I have this huge white screen right now. This is Lockdown Browser. It's taken over my desktop. That's intentional. That is so students can't see or access other applications or shortcuts or files that are on their computers. Secondly, Lockdown Browser is going to force the student to shut down specific categories of applications. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of actual applications on this long list, but you can think of it as categories of applications like communication tools, screen capture and screen sharing applications, anything that could be used to link out to the web and communicate and cheat and access resources they shouldn't access. The example I always use is an instant messaging program called Trillion. We use that internally at Respondus to chat with remote employees. It's a communication tool, so I don't want students to have access to it during a test. So it requires that they shut it down. Now, under normal circumstances, GoToMeeting should have been shut down too. And that's actually really important. We don't want students being able to share a screen while they're taking a test if somehow they were able to get into a GoToMeeting session. I have our LockDown browser at Respondus, not at Ivy Tech. I have my LockDown browser demonstration site set up to allow GoToMeeting to run. Otherwise, I would never be able to show this to you. So you can ignore the GoToMeeting thing. Normally, GoToMeeting wouldn't work. Neither would Join Me or Collaborate or WebEx or any of those other screen sharing type applications. So then when the student launches the browser, the first thing they're going to see is whatever they would normally see to log into Canvas. This would be Ivy Tech's Canvas login screen. And then we're going to find our course and that week 1 quiz right there. And before I open the quiz itself, it's worth pointing out a few other things about the browser in case you can't see them. In the upper right, we have some browser-like backwards and forwards buttons. Some of these are going to get grayed out as soon as I start the test itself. But what's more notable is what's missing. You don't see a web address field here. I can't type in google.com and go somewhere else. I'm kind of stuck in Canvas. This is the only website I'm allowed to go to. And once I'm in the test, I can't go anywhere else within Canvas either. So once I've started the test or quiz, I can't go back to the discussion board or the announcements page or the chat feature. Also, there's no file edit help menu like you might normally see in a Windows application. On the upper right-hand side, you can see there's an exit button, but there is no minimize or resize. So I can't change the shape of my full screen window. And as I mentioned before, it's open full screen, so I can't see that start button or the system tray or the dock or any of those things you might normally see. Those other buttons on the bottom of an iPad screen, those are also going to be hidden when I'm using LockDown browser. Now, one thing I will point out that is a useful button unique to LockDown browser is the Help Center. I think this is really useful. In fact, I'm going to open it so I can show you what's in it. This is basically self-help or troubleshooting for students when they're using LockDown browser. They can do things like run a system and network check. And this is pretty useful if you have students taking tests in other locations where you're unsure of their connectivity. And you're like, well, can they get to Canvas or not? I'm not sure. Let me have them run a network check to see if their internet strength signal is strong enough. There's also a link to a student-centered knowledge base and a way to run reports that can be submitted to an institution's help desk if you need to troubleshoot. Sometimes, even folks who manage labs will do this once in a while if something goes wrong, something gets corrupted, there's a weird application that's been installed on a computer and you need to figure it out. So you can either work with our support team or your own internal help desk with that data. Because this system and network check is some really detailed technical diagnostic stuff that you would never get out of a student directly, I guarantee it. So that's built in right there, and that's useful, especially if you have students taking tests remotely. I'm going to open the quiz, though, because a few other things start to happen once I start the quiz itself. First of all, is we mentioned some stuff gets grayed out, so I can't go backwards or forwards. In addition, once I'm in the quiz itself, I can't do things like use keyboard shortcuts, function keys, command keys, the right-click button on my mouse. I'm clicking that now. It doesn't work. I can't do things like Alt-Tab or Control-Alt-Delete and get out. I'm stuck in the quiz. I can't use those keyboard shortcuts. But I have everything that my instructor allows me to access, which are namely the quiz questions. And these look just like regular old Canvas quiz questions because they are. This is exactly what you would see if you were taking this quiz in a regular browser. There's my time limit. Here's some instructions at the top. I can skip to different questions if I needed to, like that. If my instructor wanted me to do an essay question, oops, I can use all of the equation editor type things, and I can write text. I can format that text with the text editor here. I can do all of the same things that I'd normally be able to do. In fact, if my instructor included images, embedded video or audio, I can look at those things, but I can't use them to get anywhere else. Even if this was a YouTube video embed, I can't go to YouTube unless you specifically whitelisted the YouTube domain, which you probably wouldn't do during a test. I haven't heard of an example where that would be relevant yet. So there you go. The student is stuck inside the quiz or test until they submit it for grading. In this example, we did allow that calculator. This is the scientific version. The standard version is just this right half. So you can see what that looks like. It floats around. If I needed to open it again, I can open it again. So if you want students to have access to a calculator, but you don't want them bringing that device, there it is. We also set up this quiz so that I couldn't exit the browser until I submit the test. So it says right here, you must complete this activity before you close the browser. That means you must submit the quiz. If I hadn't used that advanced setting, if I had left it alone, that window would say, hey, I noticed you're trying to close the browser. Are you sure you want to do that? And if the student says, yes, I'm sure, the next window would say, then you must explain yourself to your instructor. And there'll be a field that they'll be required to type in with an explanation of why they're leaving the test early that you in turn can see in your instructor's lockdown browser dashboard. But I've been locked in. So I'm going to make sure I answered all my test questions. I think I did. Yep, I'm not sure if I got them right, but I answered them. And then I'll submit the quiz, and then that's it. Now I'm done. Now, if I had given feedback, like I said before, if I'm allowed to view that, I could do that here. Because I required lockdown browser to do that, there wasn't much to see. I actually didn't put feedback in this particular quiz. But I wouldn't be able to get to this screen without lockdown browser because I required lockdown browser for the use of it. But if this wasn't here or I didn't need it, I can close lockdown browser and then things on my computer. I can restart my Trillion app if I needed to. I can open lockdown browser again and take another test if I needed to. So I hope we all saw that Lockdown Browser does a great job of addressing digital cheating concerns in proctored environments. Now, in an unproctored environment, with a couple things to keep in mind, Lockdown Browser is just a browser. So by itself, it's not going to stop the student from using external resources. It's not going to confirm the student's identity other than having them log into the Canvas course. For those things, we actually have another application that I mentioned before. It's called Respondus Monitor. I'm happy to answer questions about that if you want me to, but I wasn't going to cover it today. In short, what Respondus Monitor does is it uses a webcam and records the student at the same time that they're using Lockdown Browser. And every institution that has access to Lockdown Browser also has a limited number of seats of Respondus Monitor, if that's ever something that you want to try out or use. Now, I do want to talk about, just before we end things, a couple of just really brief resources and some best practices that I can share. A couple of things to talk about. You know, first we talked about the ability to the way that students would get the browser. I'm trying to find the right screen that has the page in it because somehow I have managed to lose my place here, so I'm just talking. Basically, what you want to make sure is that students have access to the link that they'll use to install the browser. And I'm not sure, and Ryan can even answer this if your Canvas instance has been set up this way, but the default way to set up the Canvas integration, and I'm actually going to log in to Canvas as a student in a regular browser, is that you can include the Lockdown Browser download link in Canvas in a quiz if the student tries to access it without Lockdown Browser. So I'm in Chrome. This is a normal browser. I'm logged into Canvas as a student, and when I go to try to access that same quiz that we just set up, this is the screen that I will see if I'm using the wrong type of browser, which is any browser except for Lockdown Browser. It says this quiz requires Lockdown Browser. Please launch it to take this quiz or view results. If you haven't already installed it, please download it from here. And that's the link to install the browser. And this is what the link takes you to, or takes a student to. This is the download screen for Lockdown Browser. It will tell you what version of the browser, what your operating system is. Great little overview video here for students. And then the installation itself takes maybe 90 seconds, maybe less. It has a wizard so it can walk the students through it. They do things like accept the terms of use and pick the language they want the browser to be installed in. I think we have 6 or 7 different languages. And that's it. And then once they've installed the browser, like we saw before on my computer, it will be on that download. There will be a shortcut, just like this one. Oops, sorry, this one. On their home screen on Windows, in the applications folder on a Mac, and the iPad app looks very similar to this little icon. So that's how you give students the browser itself. Then if you want students to test it out, and I recommend that you do, we always suggest that instructors do a couple of things. And these are all outlined in those welcome screen resources that I mentioned earlier. First, try it yourself. If you've never used it before, especially if you're using some of those advanced settings, you want to do things like, embed a web page, make sure it works the way you expect it to. So you can either set up a little practice quiz or you can set up a real test. Don't make it available to students yet, but take it yourself in LockDown Browser and make sure that it works the way you want it to. It will also help you choose the types of settings you're going to use, and it will help you prepare your students because you will have had that experience firsthand. In preparing your students, we have a lot of resources that can help. As I mentioned, a lot of those are in the welcome screen. But the thing I think is worth pointing out and talking a little bit about is the idea of a practice quiz. No matter how you're giving your tests, whether you're going to be sitting with students in the same room, whether it's in a testing center or lab, whether they're on their own at home, it's really important that they understand exactly what they're supposed to be doing before they take a real graded exam. So what the majority of successful instructors will do is they'll set up a brief quiz at the beginning of the semester or term. Maybe it's something like a getting to know you quiz or a homework assignment that's worth a few points, not a lot. Or you can even make it conditional that they finish the practice quiz before they get access to the midterm. The practice quiz requires LockDown Browser. It might ask them some innocuous questions. It might take 2 minutes to do. But the point of it is to ensure the student has installed the browser properly, ensure that they understand how it works, that they are to launch it first, not use Firefox or Safari. It also gives them a chance to run through the Help Center. If they have any technical concerns or questions, they can use that as a resource instead of coming to you. It saves you the trouble. And it also gives you peace of mind that everything will go smoothly when they sit down to take a real exam. They won't be saying, where's the link for the browser? And I installed the wrong thing. Or, I have a Linux computer. Do you support that? No, we don't. So that practice quiz, I think, is invaluable. Again, no matter how you give the tests, that is one thing that everybody says we're successful because of the practice quiz. The Help Center as well is a good thing to point out to students, although I certainly don't think it's required that anybody need to use it. It's just there if it's needed. And then, of course, if you want to use those resources that are baked into the LockDown Browser dashboard itself, remember that as instructors, when you open this LockDown Browser dashboard link, this is the first thing you see. So you have access to videos, a lot of different videos here. And on the Getting Started tab, under information for your syllabus and course description, there is some wonderful text that has been pre-written for you that you can copy and paste and put in your course or put in your syllabus. It includes your institution's download link, so there's another place we put it, that you can give to students, and some instructions for how to use LockDown Browser. The stuff in red are things you might want to edit. And that's it. So we've pre-written that for you to make that easier on you. You can, of course, edit it as you see fit or totally ignore it. It's up to you. But this section also has another little explanation of that practice quiz we just talked about. So this is a great area to get started if you've never used these tools before. And with that, I will wrap things up and take questions. I just want to put one more screen up for everybody. The name and email address of your account manager was Anna Desmond, who is one of my favorite people at Respondus. She's also the person who's your primary contact from Ivy Tech. You could also, of course, reach out to me. I am Ari, A-R-I-E, at respondus.com too. I'm happy to help. And we also have on our website a great searchable knowledge base with a lot of questions about those advanced features or technical questions. So feel free to use that generously as well. So Ryan, I don't think I'm able to see any questions. I'm not sure if any have been coming in or if there's anything people would like me to show in addition in the time we've got left.
Yeah, I do not see any questions right now. If anybody does have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and type those in. Again, we appreciate Ari taking the time to help us with recording a webinar, just basic training on LockDown Browser. It is a great tool that our institution has had for many years. And I think for everything that we're working on now, as far as within the last year with transitioning everything over from Blackboard to Canvas, it's been pretty smooth overall. And I think another big reason is because we have a tool like LockDown Browser and Respondus 4.0 that just help us, and that transition is very smooth with tools like that. So I think a great company and a great website. Ari mentioned that they have great training and great videos that are there on their website that is for the public to view. If you do have any issues that may pop up, because LockDown Browser is mainly just a tool that our students would utilize. So sometimes they have issues on their computer that we don't manage. Those are just things that you can have your students put in just a basic ticket in, and we could help them along the way. If you needed some issue or there's some question about how to utilize that as far as for a specific test or quiz, you could also reach out to your online technology coordinator, or go ahead and put in a ticket if there's any issue there that you would have with utilizing it within Ivy Learn. I don't see any questions, so we'll go ahead and end this session. Again, I want to say thank you to Ari Sowers from Respondus. She is the Director of Training at Respondus. And again, we've been working with Respondus, been a loyal partner with them for years, and I've worked with Ari and Anna as well for years, so appreciate them. And then taking the time to help us today. Ari, great presentation. We'll go ahead and record. Like I said, this is recorded. We will put it into our content folder within the Faculty Resource Center. So definitely try and plug that. Make sure you're a member of the Faculty Resource Center. If not, all you have to do is go into Ivy Learn, log in like you normally would, go into Help, and then you'll see a link there for the Ivy Tech Faculty Resource Center. And if you haven't already done it, you just type in, go through that process, put in a request, and then basically I'll get it and I'll just verify that you're a faculty or staff member for the college. So thank you, Ari, and thank you everybody that joined us today. And we'll go ahead and end this meeting now. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.